everything about his taste and everything that appeared to be his lifestyle was pretty much, upscale. He wasn't like a cheap guy. He was always trying to do something to show people that he wanted the best. And it would turn out that there were claims that however he ended up in his financial position had something to do with crime. On several occasions, I came back and there would be law enforcement officers parked in front of the facility, and I would inquire. I would say, well, what is the sheriff doing here? Or what is that law enforcement officer doing here? And he would lead me to believe that it might be something associated with a client or something, or some resident who had rented a storage facility, because that happens from time to time when people are trying to figure out how to retain their property, or something has gone on where they didn't pay their bill or what have you. Sometimes the law enforcement will have to be called. But I knew it was abnormal because of where they were parked and the way they were parked and what have you. See, when a person is trained in the military, law enforcement has to approach those people much differently than they do civilian people, because they know those people have the potential to be dangerous, because they're trained to kill. And if a person is believed to be associated with something involving crime, where there would be some type of alarm associated with it, obviously that could be a danger even much more. And so it was my understanding that Colonel was leading people to believe that he had nothing to do with what happened to his father, and that apparently they were looking for who the source of the murder actually was. But ultimately, he had made no mention whatsoever of the fact that his father had been murdered. And that's when I wondered, okay, why would somebody hide something? Why, if he's so open about everything else, would he not mention something like that? We had a discussion about his father. We had a discussion about his mother. We had a discussion about his relationship with his parents and his upbringing and everything. And I had a chance to see validation. It wasn't just something that he told me. I know some of this had to have been truthful. And so when I found out that his father had been murdered in the manner that it is claimed, I knew that the pieces to everything that had happened in the past that left me wondering what was going on with him were coming together. But I didn't say anything to anybody publicly. I didn't say anything publicly because a lot of times when you're going through your own issues, you don't want to end up getting in the middle of anybody else's mess, for starters. The other thing was I didn't want to accuse anybody, because the guy that I knew was a really nice man. He looked out for me on many occasions, and he looked out for Ben, and he looked out for many customers and other people that came and went. There was nothing about his character that suggested to me he was hiding something very gruesome. As a matter of fact, the reason that I stayed at the facility had something to do with the fact that he seemed like he ran such a disciplined shop. But I do remember some occasions when I saw what almost seemed like an alter ego, where it almost seemed like he was enraged and dangerous on a couple of occasions, where his personality seems to be almost split, like something was troubling him or bothering him. And I didn't know what that meant. Some days he would just be kind of on edge, almost paranoid like. And I didn't know what was going on with him. I figured, okay, well, maybe that's just something from PTSD or flashbacks or something associated with things that happened in the military, because sometimes things like that happen with soldiers. I would find out later that part of the reason why the Columbus Police Department and the sheriff's department and some of these agencies had been following me around and harassing me literally every place I went. Like I would come down Macon Road and I'm telling you, 20 to 30 police cars every day would track me up and down the entire roadway, to the point where I had to call into the police department and ask them what could possibly be going on that would make need for this many police officers in this area with nothing going on. And when they would be driving past me, giving me stare downs, or sometimes they would drive in this accusatory way and slow down and be staring upon me and looking at me and what I had. And on one occasion, I was coming up the roadway and one of the officers came up behind me and turned on the lights. I was on a bike. And he jumped out of the car literally and started sprinting towards me. And I just stood still. And I realized at that time he was trying to get me to make some type of adverse reaction so that he could justify taking an action against me unprovoked. And he asked me where I was going, and I told him, I said, I'm going down here to my storage facility because I'm responsible for it on this weekend. And I showed him that I had the keys to the gate, and I showed him my keys to my own my own space. And when he was unsuccessful at inducing a conflict, he released me and turned the car around and went the other direction. And originally I had filed a complaint, or written a complaint, I should say, but I never filed it because they had so many distressors going on with law enforcement in this community and that kind of stuff in the first place. I said, I don't want to do anything that's going to cause any more upset than there is that's already going on. But I knew something was going on with the way that they were patrolling the area in general. And again, these behavior patterns that Colonel would have on occasion led me to believe that he was hiding something, but I didn't know what. Because sometimes they hire ex-soldiers to work for and with the police to help them solve cases. So I thought, okay, well, maybe Colonel's just doing something to try to help investigate. Maybe he's trying to do something to help accommodate. Maybe his behavior is about trying to be like protective of something that he's aware of that he hasn't disclosed yet. But it would turn out that those reactions were probably more of a paranoia. He didn't know who to trust anymore because he had these things that he was hiding associated with these finances and associated with the death of his father. When I first came there, I received a call from him, and he told me it was urgent that I come back out to the facility immediately because something was going on. And so I presumed that there was an issue associated with something involving the storage spaces. Well, he had me move out of the space that I was in into a different space. He told me that some oil had been wasted and that I needed to move my things to prevent damage. But when I got there was no oil on the floor. He kind of made it up. And so I think that he was paranoid about me because my demeanor is not to come in disclosing a whole bunch of information. I think he thought that I might have been like a undercover police officer or a private investigator initially. But eventually he mellowed out and we started to develop a tenant-manager relationship, and we started to establish some trust with one another. And that was how I ended up helping around the facility and looking out for him, because he was an older man with a wife who was like 30 or something. And so I'm not sure he knew what to do, because he knew he had nobody in terms of family, immediate family at least, and he needed some type of social relationships. I would notice that he hung around the facility in an abnormal way. Like most people have somewhere to go, they're associated with clubs and what have you, and I thought it strange that he wasn't a part of anything. But I assumed that because he had a sticker saying that he was a lifetime member of the FOP, that this guy had to be legitimate. He has a military background. Why would somebody who has done something wrong be a member of the FOP? And so he had everybody kind of deceived in some ways about who he was and what he was doing. I used to notice that he seemed paranoid in terms of his activity on site. When I would be working, he would drive around like a lot of times repeatedly, kind of keeping an eye on me, if you will. And he would often show up a lot of times and just kind of stop and hang around and be looking. And I think two things were going on. I do think that he might have been a little bit afraid that something about what he was hiding might get disclosed and he didn't know who to trust anymore. But I also think he just kind of needed somebody to talk to, because being down there at the storage facility, it's not exactly a social place with the exception of the customers that come and go. But when you're holding something inside that's like of the nature of things that involved his father, I'm sure that takes an emotional toll on you. And I've been asking questions the whole time about whether or not this person that he claimed was his wife had any knowledge of it, what his relationship was with her during this time, and where she was when all of this was underway. Because something about all of it isn't quite adding up. Sergeant Randy Long, who is the Columbus Police Department's cold case investigator, was apparently working on the case of John Roberson for quite some time. He was also working on several other cold cases that were in Columbus, including the case involving Kareem Lane, who was alleged to be the person who went inside the home of School Superintendent Jim Burns and stabbed him in the back while he lay in bed with his wife Stella. And they were unsuccessful after trying him 2 times on the basis that they had no evidence whatsoever indicating that he had anything whatsoever to do with what they claimed. They were just going to try to convict him anyway. And Randy Long was said to have gone to Kareem Lane's residence, kicked in the door and just accused him and arrested him, and claimed to have a knife with his DNA on it. And so Randy Long had been a part of ultimately something that was bringing potentially innocent people into custody and into courtrooms, accusing them of heinous crimes just to be able to close cases. They were looking for people that they could frame. They were looking for people that they could blame to get rid of the case. And he had been around Columbus and the police department for a really long time. And he knew how to make the appearance of what he wanted things to look like. And to see him sitting there in the courtroom, willing to sacrifice somebody's life when he knew for certain there really wasn't any evidence whatsoever, told me a lot about what was taking place in this community. And so now he had been working the case of Colonel John Roberson. It's not like they disclosed it. It's not like they told anybody what they were doing or who they were investigating. They can put you in a list or a lineup just by having association. I can remember when I would be coming into the area, things that indicate he had to have been talking with Bruce Huff, who is the counselor for that area in that district. He had been talking to all of the business owners, including the people up there at the Rite Aid store and the Burger King owned by Marvin Schuster and several other businesses up there. And those people would be watching me on their cell phones, calling the police and calling throughout the area every time I would come into the area. They were going to figure out some kind of way to make me look like I was involved with what took place. But because I had been documenting my whereabouts And because I had been writing so frequently to the press, and because I was doing things that clearly accounted for my whereabouts, they were unable to.